On October 3rd, 2023, I made a spontaneous decision to drive to Klingenberg am Main, a striking town in northern Bavaria characterized by its steep hills lined with vineyards. The same river that flows through Frankfurt winds its way through this picturesque place, lending it an air of serenity. Unlike famous pilgrimage sites, Klingenberg bears no large signs or bustling crowds, marking it as the resting place of a suffering soul. Accompanied by my children, I arrived on a cloudy day, relying on Google Maps to locate the cemetery where Anneliese Michel is buried. We wandered through the stillness until we found her grave in the northeast corner, adorned with a delicate gold crucifix. Standing there, I reflected on the nature of suffering and her extraordinary story. Michel is a common name in Klingenberg, and the family seemed to live ordinary lives punctuated by tragedy, one such event being a fire that destroyed part of their property. From what I've read, it seems they desired privacy, perhaps even to move beyond the attention her story drew. Yet Anneliese's suffering remains a profound, if quiet, testament to a spiritual mystery many still grapple to understand. When people hear her name, they often think of the exorcism of Emily Rose, a dramatized version of her life. But her real story transcends sensationalism. Anneliese Michel reminds me of the many hidden saints of the Church, souls who willingly suffer for the redemption of others as a profound act of love. They are not always canonized or publicly recognized. Their reward lies in a realm far beyond this one. It made me wonder, could my own conversion have been purchased not only by Jesus' ultimate sacrifice, but also through the silent yes of a victim soul, uniting their suffering with his in love? Anneliese's death was undeniably tragic, and there were decisions that could have saved her life. Yet, I believe her mission went beyond earthly survival. She was here to save others, a calling born out of the Virgin Mary's request for her to suffer as an act of intercession. Standing at her grave, I could not help but feel the weight of her sacrifice, a life lived in extraordinary suffering, perhaps so others might find grace and redemption. For the Michel family, faith and tradition formed the backbone of their lives. They were ordinary people in an ordinary hard-working town, but their daughter Anneliese would come to bear an extraordinary cross. Born on September 21st, 1952, Anneliese Michel was the second of 4 daughters to Joseph and Anna Michel. Her childhood was marked by simplicity and stability, grounded in her family's Catholic faith. Daily prayers and Sunday Mass were not mere rituals but lifelines, anchoring the Michel household to their unshakable belief in God's providence. Anneliese, with her quiet demeanor and gentle smile, stood out for her devotion from an early age. Those who knew her described her as kind, obedient, and deeply introspective, a child who seemed to carry an uncommon sense of purpose. As a young girl, Anneliese displayed a natural sensitivity to the spiritual realm. She would often kneel by her bedside, hands clasped tightly, whispering fervent prayers for the souls in purgatory. Her love for the Eucharist and the Virgin Mary grew alongside her, becoming central to her identity. Yet, there was no outward indication that her life would take a path so marked by suffering. Her teenage years began like those of any other young girl in Klingenberg. She excelled in school, enjoyed spending time with friends, and dreamed of becoming a teacher. But in 1968, when Anneliese was just 16, everything changed. One morning, seemingly without warning, her body betrayed her. She collapsed at school, convulsing violently, her classmates and teachers frozen in shock. The doctors diagnosed her with epilepsy, a condition they believed would explain the sudden seizures. She was prescribed medication and reassured that her life could continue as normal. But for Anneliese, life would never again feel normal. Alongside the seizures came something far more unsettling, feelings of an unseen presence pressing down upon her, as though the weight of darkness itself was bearing into her soul. She began hearing voices accusing her of being damned and whispering blasphemies that shook her to the core. Doctors dismissed these experiences as hallucinations caused by her epilepsy, but Anneliese knew differently. She believed she was being drawn into a spiritual battle, one she hadn't chosen but felt unable to escape. Despite the increasing challenges, Anneliese's faith only deepened. She spent hours in prayer, clinging to the sacraments as a source of strength and consolation. She confided in her mother and her parish priest about the growing sense that her suffering had a purpose. Though she couldn't fully articulate it at the time, she began to believe that her trials were not merely hers to endure. They were meant to serve a greater good. Her family watched helplessly as her condition worsened. The once vibrant and joyful girl they knew became weighed down by a suffering that seemed disproportionate to her years. Yet even in her darkest moments, Anneliese showed a quiet resilience. Her sisters would later recall her gentleness and the way she continued to care for others, even as she bore her own hidden pain. By the time she turned 18, Anneliese had begun to suspect that her suffering might be connected to a divine calling. She had read the lives of saints who spoke of offering their pain as a sacrifice for the salvation of souls, and she felt a stirring within her heart, a willingness to say yes to God no matter the cost. Though her friends and teachers saw her as a brilliant and capable young woman, full of promise, Anneliese knew her life was already taking a different course. In a quiet moment of prayer, she wrote in her diary, "I want to suffer for others. I want my pain to have meaning." Little did she know how much she would endure, and how many lives she would touch through her yes. What began as a diagnosis of epilepsy was becoming something much deeper, an invitation to join her suffering to Christ for the redemption of others. It was a mystery she couldn't fully grasp, but one she would embrace with a love and courage that belied her age. As her struggles grew, so did her faith, but the battle was only beginning. The weight of her suffering would soon become a cross so heavy that only grace could sustain her. The young girl from Klingenberg, once dreaming of an ordinary future, was being prepared for an extraordinary mission, one that would demand everything she had to give. By the early 1970s, Anneliese Michel's life had become a battlefield of unseen forces. Her health continued to decline, but the physical pain was overshadowed by a deeper, more inexplicable torment. The seizures persisted despite medical treatment, and the voices that tormented her grew louder and more frequent. These were not ordinary hallucinations. They spoke in tones of hatred, mocking her prayers and cursing her faith. Anneliese began to sense that her suffering was not merely medical, but profoundly spiritual, a battle between light and darkness. The Michel family turned to doctors for help, but each consultation brought only disappointment. The medications prescribed had little effect, and some even exacerbated her condition. Anneliese's devout Catholic faith led her to believe that the cause of her torment might be spiritual. She began to experience aversions to sacred objects. She could not look at a crucifix or enter a church without feeling a powerful, oppressive force holding her back. At times she spoke in voices that were not her own, saying things she could not remember afterward. Her family, deeply concerned, sought the counsel of their parish priest, Father Ernst Alt, who immediately recognized that something beyond the physical was afflicting her. Father Alt, along with other clergy, began to document what they believed to be signs of demonic possession. These included her knowledge of languages she had never studied, her superhuman strength during episodes of torment, and her uncanny ability to discern the presence of blessed objects, even when they were hidden from her view. Despite these signs, the Church was cautious. A formal exorcism could not be granted without extensive evidence and approval from the local bishop. During this time, Anneliese experienced moments of profound spiritual clarity. She confided to her family and priests that she believed she had been called to suffer as a victim soul. She spoke of visions in which the Virgin Mary appeared to her, asking her to accept her suffering for the sake of others. Mary, she said, had given her a choice, to either endure her suffering as a means of atonement for souls or to be relieved of her pain. Anneliese chose to suffer. She saw her suffering as a way to participate in Christ's redemptive work, offering herself as a vessel through which grace could flow to others. It was a choice of extraordinary love and courage, but one that came at a great cost. In 1975, after years of documentation and consultation, the local bishop finally authorized the rite of exorcism. Fathers Alt and Arnold Renz were tasked with performing the exorcisms, and over the next 10 months, Anneliese underwent more than 60 sessions. These were grueling, physically and spiritually exhausting rituals, during which the demons tormenting her revealed their identities. They claimed to be fallen angels and condemned souls, including Lucifer himself. Their hatred for Anneliese was palpable, but her prayers and resolve remained unwavering. During the exorcisms, Anneliese endured unimaginable suffering. She would often collapse from exhaustion or injure herself during violent episodes. Despite this, she never stopped praying for others, especially those who had fallen away from the faith. Her diary entries from this time reveal her profound trust in God and her willingness to continue suffering for the salvation of souls. She wrote, "I am willing to endure this for the glory of God. I will fight until the end for those who have no one to fight for them." The toll on her body was immense. By the spring of 1976, Anneliese was severely malnourished and physically weakened. Her parents and priests, though deeply troubled by her condition, respected her wishes to continue the exorcisms. Anneliese herself insisted that the work was not yet complete, and she pleaded with her family to let her fulfill the mission she believed God had given her. Throughout these months, Anneliese's suffering was not without moments of grace. She reported visions of Christ and the Virgin Mary, who comforted her and reminded her of the purpose behind her pain. In one vision, Mary promised her that her suffering would save many souls and that she would soon find rest in heaven. These glimpses of divine consolation sustained her through the darkest hours. As news of her condition spread, public opinion began to turn against the Michel family and the priests involved. Many dismissed her affliction as a mental illness and criticized the Church for allowing the exorcisms to continue. The media sensationalized her story, painting her as a tragic victim of religious fanaticism. Yet those closest to Anneliese knew the depth of her faith and the extraordinary courage she displayed in the face of her trials. By the summer of 1976, it was clear that Anneliese's body could no longer endure the strain. Her once vibrant frame had wasted away, and her health had reached a critical point. Yet, even in her final days, she remained steadfast in her mission. Her last recorded words to her parents were, "Stay with me. I am afraid." But even in her fear, she clung to her faith, offering her suffering for the redemption of others. Anneliese Michel died on July 1, 1976, at the age of 23. Her death marked the end of her earthly suffering, but it also ignited a firestorm of controversy. The world would debate her story for decades, but those who knew her best believed she had fulfilled her mission as a victim soul. She had borne her cross with a love and courage that few could comprehend, offering herself entirely for the sake of others. Anneliese Michel's death on July 1, 1976, at the age of 23, marked the end of her earthly suffering, but the beginning of a legacy that continues to stir both faith and controversy. For those who knew her, Anneliese was more than a tragic figure. She was a soul who willingly embraced suffering for the redemption of others. Yet her story remains a paradox, a mix of profound holiness and human tragedy. In the days following her death, the Michel family was thrust into the spotlight. The autopsy revealed severe malnutrition and dehydration, leading to charges of negligent homicide against her parents and the two priests who performed the exorcisms. The trial became a media spectacle, with experts debating whether her condition was the result of untreated mental illness or genuine demonic possession. The court ultimately convicted the parents and priests, though their sentences were later suspended. For much of the world, Anneliese Michel was reduced to a cautionary tale of religious extremism. But those who had witnessed her suffering firsthand saw something much deeper. Father Ernst Alt, one of the priests who performed the exorcisms, described her as a young woman of extraordinary faith, someone who willingly bore her cross out of love for Christ and for souls in need of redemption. Her parents, Joseph and Anna, remained steadfast in their belief that Anneliese had been called to a special mission. Her mother would later recount Anneliese's visions of the Virgin Mary and her declarations that she had chosen to suffer for others. Anneliese's own words, recorded in her diaries and during the exorcisms, offer a glimpse into her spiritual depth. She believed her suffering was part of a divine plan, an offering united with Christ's passion to atone for the sins of the world. In one entry, she wrote, "I want to suffer for others. I want to offer my pain so that souls might return to God." These words reflect the theology of the victim soul, a concept rooted in Catholic tradition where individuals willingly accept suffering as a means of participating in Christ's redemptive work. Her case also drew attention to the broader mystery of suffering in the Christian faith. How could a loving God permit such torment in someone so devoted to him? For Anneliese, the answer lay in the example of Christ himself. She saw her suffering not as a punishment, but as an invitation to share in his mission of salvation. This belief gave her the strength to endure physical and spiritual agony, trusting that her pain had meaning beyond what the world could see. While the legal and medical debates surrounding her case persisted, a quiet devotion to Anneliese began to grow. Pilgrims from around the world started visiting her grave in Klingenberg, leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten prayers. Many reported feeling a sense of peace and spiritual renewal at her resting place. Though the Church has not officially recognized her as a saint, her story continues to inspire faith, especially among those who struggle with suffering or feel called to intercede for others. The theology of the victim soul is not easily understood in a modern world that often seeks to avoid pain at all costs. Yet Anneliese Michel's life offers a powerful testimony to the transformative power of suffering when united with love. Her willingness to accept her trials as a means of bringing others closer to God challenges the notion that suffering is meaningless. Instead, she showed that it can be a profound act of love, a hidden yet powerful force in the divine plan of salvation. Today, Anneliese's legacy lives on in the quiet devotion of those who see her as a hidden saint. Her grave, tucked away in a corner of the Klingenberg cemetery, stands as a testament to her faith and her mission. For some, she is a reminder of the unseen battles waged in the spiritual realm. For others, she is a source of hope, proof that even the most profound suffering can be redeemed and transformed into something beautiful. As her story continues to be told, Anneliese Michel remains a witness to the mystery of God's love and the redemptive power of suffering. Her life was not one of worldly triumph, but of spiritual victory. She embraced her cross with courage and love, offering herself for the sake of others. And though her reward may remain hidden from the world, those who see her as a victim soul know that her sacrifice was not in vain. In the end, Anneliese's story is not just about suffering, it is about love. Love that perseveres through pain, love that trusts in God's plan, and love that seeks the salvation of others. It is the love of a soul who, in her quiet and hidden way, mirrored Christ's ultimate act of redemption. Her legacy calls us to reflect on the meaning of our own trials and to consider how we might unite them with His, transforming our pain into a gift of love for the world. A quiet pilgrimage to the grave of a suffering soul like Anneliese Michel reminds us of an essential truth. Most of our daily suffering is unseen by the world. Yet, even in its hiddenness, it carries profound meaning when united with the redemptive suffering of Jesus on the cross. Her life challenges us to ask ourselves, do we embrace our trials with the same courage? Do we see them as opportunities to love, to intercede, to trust in God's plan, even if the world will never notice? Anneliese bore her cross in love, believing that her suffering could serve a purpose far greater than herself. Her grave, quiet and unassuming, is not a monument to tragedy, but a testament to the power of faith and the mystery of divine grace. Few may ever visit it, and even fewer may fully understand her mission. But as Anneliese herself believed, heaven, not this world, is the true audience of our lives. Whatever crosses we are called to bear, whether large or small, we are called to bear them with love. To visit her grave was not only to honor her life, but to draw strength from her example. It reminded me to meditate on the mystery of suffering, to wonder, to pray, and to reaffirm the truth that love is what gives our trials meaning. May Anneliese Michel, a soul who embraced her cross for others, rest in the peace she so deeply deserves. And may her story inspire us all to carry our own crosses with faith, hope, and love. On October